Friends, welcome once again to this unique Clinical Pearls Delhi PG Track program, the 10th webinar in the series. So, after the great success of the first 9 webinars, your huge response, participation, we are delighted to present you something of the track, and that is something which we deal every day, read every day, and which residents often ask every day, that what are the guidelines, what are the practice changing trials that we should remember for our exams and for our practice. So today we have the wonderful panel of Dr. Balbir Singh, who is Chairman Cardiology, Max Super Specialty Hospital from Saket, and Dr. Anildal, who is Head Department of Cardiology at Janakpuri Super Specialty Hospital. We have Professor Jamal Yusuf, Professor of Department of Cardiology at GV Pant Hospital, and myself, Dr. Mohit Gupta, and my colleague, Professor Girish MP. And we have our speaker, Professor Dr. Upendra Kaul, who is Chairman and Dean Academics and Research of Batra Hospital and Medical Research Center. So now let us go on straight to the webinar. Over to you, Dr. Balbir and Dr. Dhal and Dr. Jamal Yusuf now to invite Dr. Kaul.
Thank you, Mohit, for your introduction. And today is a very unique day because we have one of the best speakers and one of the most intelligent cardiologists that we have. We have Dr. Upendra Kaul, who is my teacher and a great academician, to tell us about the trials that we have seen over the last 1 year. And it will be real honor to understand something new that's happening, because we've seen so many changes happen in the last 1 year. And in this year, we are passing through a very difficult time, but I hope we are able to get it fine. But these trials will take us a long way, because some very radical changes have happened in these trials. And even though ACC was not physical, but some very beautiful data came out in the ACC also. So I would invite Professor Kaul for his deliberation on the new trials.
Thank you very much, Balbir. Thank you very much, Anil, Jamal, and Dr. Mohit, who is the man behind the scene, who has created this forum. And it's such a popular forum because of its basic level and the teaching level, and there's no frills attached with this. And today I've been asked to talk on one of my pet subjects, clinical trials. And obviously one cannot deal with all the clinical trials, but I'm going to give you a flavor of the clinical trials which have happened in the last 1.5 years, maybe 1 year, which are really, really very important trials. And we'll start with the slides visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. So basically it is the practice and guideline changing trials of 2019 and up to 2020. Now I'm going to have divided these trials into some sections so that there is some uniformity. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the important dual antiplatelet drug trials of the recent origin. One is the ESA-REACT, THEMIS, and TWILIGHT. Well, ESA-REACT has been one of the important trials, ESA-REACT 5. If anybody, because there are a lot of students here, if anybody asks ESA-REACT 5, you start speaking on ESA-REACT 5, the next question would be, what was 1, 2, 3, and 4? So I thought, let us just, see what are these trials. And Isar is the name of a beautiful river in Munich. And the Munich cardiologists, Dr. Schomig and Castrati have named these trials after Isar. So the ISAR-1 was in low-risk stable patients who underwent angioplasty, and they found that abciximab had no added advantage over clopidogrel. Then came the next trial, REACT-2, that additional abciximab reduced primary endpoint only in those patients with acute coronary syndrome where troponin was elevated. Then comes the 3 in 2008. In patients pre-treated with clopidogrel, bivalirudin did not increase the net clinical benefit through anything, although bleeding was reduced. Mind it, those were the days when bivalirudin was very popular. And then came last one, the 4-1, Abciximab plus unfractionated heparin as compared to bivalirudin failed to demonstrate any advantage on 30 days primary endpoint in patients and resulted in even more bleeding. So now we come to ESAR test 5. And as you know, prasugrel as a very important antiplatelet agent in TIMI-Triton had been shown it was good, better than clopidogrel, but there was a bleeding problem, although the subgroups were identified, but then it never remained a popular drug. All of us started giving ticagrelor. And this is the first trial which has compared head-to-head the two agents. An open label randomized study of around 4,000 patients between ticagrelor and prasugrel, and out of which 40% were on ticagrelor and 41% on prasugrel, and non-STEMI as well as STEMI and unstable angina. They obviously excluded those very high-risk groups like stroke, transient ischemic attacks, neoplasms, AV malformations, active bleeding. And the primary endpoint was a strong one, death, MI or stroke. And obviously the most feared one was the safety endpoint of BARC bleeding types 3, 4, and 5. And what did they find? That in this group of patients, prasugrel was clearly superior to ticagrelor in terms of the primary endpoint, reduction in death, MI or stroke, and by a difference of around 2%. And when it comes to bleeding, there was no increase in the bleeding. In fact, if you see the curve, ticagrelor has a little more bleeding than prasugrel, but it's not statistically significant. It could be just a chance. So obviously, its trial very clearly showed where we are. But there were criticisms of this, especially, the makers of ticagrelor, AstraZeneca, came out with a big criticism. And those were that it's an open label design because you knew what you were giving. There can be a bias in the assertment of outcomes, although this is mitigated somehow by the blinded outcome education. There was a slight asymmetry because 15% of the patients in ticagrelor stopped taking it because of side effects versus 12%, which may give an advantage to prasugrel. And also, greater than 80% of the individuals underwent PCI, indicating that this study may be applicable mainly to those patients who are undergoing PCI and not on medical treatment. So then comes an editorial in the same issue. And the editorial is by Hani Janeet, who says that this trial very clearly has shown that in the patients of ACS in whom invasive evaluation was planned, prasugrel-based strategy was clearly superior to ticagrelor-based strategy by reducing the death, MI or stroke at 1 year very clearly, as we already seen, with the number to be treated just 42 patients. And there was a significant reduction of 1.8 percentage points in the incidence of recurrent, spontaneous, and PCI-associated MI, with no significant difference between major bleeding. The patients who received ticagrelor discontinued the medication earlier and more frequently after discharge than the patients who received prasugrel. Thus, prasugrel appears to be having a more favorable side effect profile than ticagrelor. And based upon this, he has suggested an algorithm that patients with acute coronary syndrome who have history of TIA or stroke straight away go for ticagrelor, but who don't have, which is the large majority, and have ST elevation MI, no doubt, they go for prasugrel rather than ticagrelor. But who don't have a ST-MI, unstable angina or non-ST elevation MI, now if it is they're going for medical treatment or ischemia guided therapy, go for ticagrelor. But if you're doing coronary angiography and you're doing in PCI, consider prasugrel rather than ticagrelor. If you're considering medical therapy, then go for ticagrelor. And if you're considering CABG, then it's your choice after surgery, what do you want? So this was about the ESAR test 5. The next trial I'm going to talk about is again an important trial because we know aspirin is the standard of care in patients with stable ischemic heart disease who have diabetes. But is it that if we add an antiplatelet agent, will it give additional benefits? And that comes to the THEMIS group of trials. First one was ticagrelor in patients with stable coronary disease and diabetes. Patients more than 50 years of age, stable coronary artery disease, no previous MI are randomized to aspirin or placebo or aspirin plus ticagrelor. In the beginning, it was 90 twice a day, but after the publication of Pegasus results, they came down to 60 milligrams twice a day, which is lower bleeding than 90 milligrams. And what did they find? They find in the main trial that is there's a benefit which is significant, small benefit towards reduction in ischemic events, but at the cost of higher bleeding. So the benefit was nullified by bleeding, lower incidence of ischemic events, but higher incidence of bleeding. So it became difficult to accept this. But then came the group who had stable disease but had a previous angioplasty. That is the THEMIS PCI, which came in Lancet in 2019. And it was a phase 3 placebo-controlled randomized study where if you compare THEMIS with THEMIS PCI on the left side and THEMIS on the right side, you will see that in THEMIS PCI, the benefit is clearly more than in THEMIS, and the bleeding, as you can see, is much lower. This is very clear that in patients with diabetes with previous PCI who have a high ischemic risk and a low bleeding risk, aspirin plus ticagrelor, who had tolerated dual antiplatelet therapy during their initial period, had a net clinical benefit. Let us take this in perspective. First of all, this trial is the largest trial of diabetes with coronary artery disease to date. 19,000 patients with diabetes and coronary disease defined angiographically, treated with a stent, treated with bypass surgery, and treated medically. 15% of the patients were treated with angioplasty in the past, and that is again the biggest subgroup so far studied of diabetic patients. 10% reduction in cardiovascular death, MI or stroke, that was statistically significant by the intention to treat analysis. On treatment analysis, the results are even stronger and more robust in terms of magnitude of benefit and their statistical significance. There's a significant reduction in MI, ischemic stroke, and ST elevation MI, in amputation, acute limb ischemia. Full spectrum of non-fatal ischemic events was significantly reduced with ticagrelor versus placebo on top of aspirin in this trial. 50% of the patients with a history of prior PCI, largely stenting, there was even a larger reduction of 15% relative risk reduction, very significant. And in pre-treatment analysis where the patients were actually adherent to ticagrelor and not having side effects, there was even a significant reduction in all-cause mortality, which is the most significant and the most solid part of any mortality reduction. What about the overall bleeding risk? In THEMIS, overall in the non-PCI patients, there was a signal towards more intracranial bleeding, although it was significantly more intracranial bleeding, largely due to subdural hematomas resulting from falls. But still, it's not a trivial thing to happen. The absolute rate in the overall trial is increased from 0.5 to 0.7%, a small absolute increase, but statistically significant. So based upon this trial, US FDA very recently, on June 1st, has approved both the THEMIS trials. The US Food and Drug Administration has approved ticagrelor for use with aspirin to cut the risk of a first myocardial infarction or stroke in high-risk patients with coronary artery disease, but no history of MI or stroke. The new indication is based on the results of THEMIS, in which such patients with both coronary artery disease and type 2 diabetes on dual antiplatelet therapy with ticagrelor 60 milligram twice a day showed a 10% drop in risk for major adverse cardiac events. the absolute difference being 0.8%, and 42 countries have participated with more than 19,000 patients. Such a strong evidence. And this is a, big shot in the arm of, the drug. And obviously the drug, the sponsor of THEMIS trial was AstraZeneca. So this was about THEMIS. So let me come to one or two more trials of this before we take the question. Now the question is, this has been a lingering question in the mind of many people. Can we give up aspirin for a short period and then continue only on ticagrelor after angioplasty, whether it is for chronic stable angina or unstable angina? And this was actually tested in a trial called Global Leaders, which is not of 2019, but just giving you a reference. And this trial was DAP for 30 days, and in which after 30 days, aspirin was stopped and ticagrelor alone was continued for 2 years versus DAP for 1 year. It showed no benefit of bleeding. So one thought that, there's no way. But then comes another very important trial, and that is the Twilight study, which again goes on the hypothesis that can we stop one of the dual antiplatelet drugs, which is aspirin, after 3 months and continue with ticagrelor? And this is important because it's a multi-country study. And in fact, in this particular study, I have represented India, and India contributed to about 900 patients. This was basically aspirin plus ticagrelor versus ticagrelor only in patients who had tolerated dual antiplatelet therapy for 3 months. And they were all high-risk patients. And the trial hypothesis was that if we do this, bleeding will be much lower, possibly ischemic events will not be affected. And there were patients who had to be, chosen carefully. Clinical criteria, high risk, elderly, females, troponin positive, some amount of CKD, one of them, plus one angiographic criteria like multivessel disease, thrombus containing lesion, bifurcation lesion, left main, calcified lesion, means complex lesions, angiographically as well as clinically. And what did it show? And basically, this is a trial design that after this period of 3 months, when they were continuing on both the drugs, one arm gets only ticagrelor plus placebo, and the other gets ticagrelor plus aspirin up to 15 months, that is 1 year. And then you do whatever way you want to treat them. Primary endpoint being bleeding, and the key secondary endpoint being ischemic. What did it show? It very clearly showed that there is a 44% reduction in significant bleeding when you stop aspirin after 3 months and just continue ticagrelor. And this is not just minor bleeding. This is BARC 3 or 5, TIMI major, Gusto moderate or severe, and ISTH major. Means it was basically whatever way you look at the bleeding, this is real severe bleeding is being prevented. And the efficacy endpoint, not at all affected, means efficacy remains the same. Conclusions are that in high-risk patients who undergo PCI and have tolerated aspirin and ticagrelor for 3 months without any adverse events like bleeding in the first 3 months, you can give up aspirin. And that's a very important message, I think. Substantially lower bleeding without increasing ischemic endpoints. But one has to be very careful before applying this, because it may not be generalizable to all. It's not generalizable to all the patients undergoing PCI, given the requirement in the trial for both high-risk features, clinical and angiographic, and patients receiving background therapy with other P2Y12. It's not applicable with prasugrel, it's not applicable with clopidogrel. And it had lower than expected death, MI, or stroke in this complex population, and lack of power to detect differences in the risk of important yet rare clinical events such as stent thrombosis and stroke. So this is about these 3 trials, and Balbir and Dr. Dhal, and open for discussion, open for any questions. I think let us take the opinion or the comments from Balbir, Dr. Dhal. Yeah,
So these are actually, thank you for really an outstanding presentation of the update on antiplatelets in 2020. And just like the coronavirus, we are a little confused because just 2 years ago, aspirin and MD prevention took a nosedive with aspirin, and so it became a little bit of an issue. Since the very powerful antiplatelets P2Y12 inhibitors are available in the form of prasugrel and ticagrelor, there have been 2 or 3 questions in everybody's mind. Number one is aspirin required? Number two, which of the 2 is better? Is there a clinical subset where one is better than the other? Number 3, are we using the appropriate dose? As you may like to highlight that the dose of prasugrel in Japan is actually half that in the rest of the world, because the Japanese FDA probably examined this. And really, in today's world, when we are looking at residual thrombin generation in patients with CAD, PAD, and post-PCI, we are talking about introducing maybe NOACs in small doses, for example, the rivaroxaban 2.5 BD kind of subset, and we have data from Atlas TB51, and then from the COMPASS. So it gets us all very, very confused. Is it simply that we should have standard of care issues with just aspirin, clopidogrel? Nobody talks about clopidogrel any longer, but the use of clopidogrel appears to have gone up in the last few years back again, because we've experienced some bleeding manifestations with the more powerful agents. We have newer kids on the block, not just cangrelor, but selatogrel has been something which has been published this year. So all this for somebody in his practice would need to know simple things. We know that prasugrel is to be avoided post maybe TIA stroke, maybe in a thinner person or in an older person. But really, if it's a more powerful agent, we don't want to have the counterintuitive kind of hypotheses which were generated by the Plato, and especially when they were compared to the Trilogy or other trials. So in a nutshell, sir, if you would like to tell us, in 2020, what is it you would do? High-risk patient, would you use aspirin at all?
Hello, sir.
Would you use aspirin at all? Would you use this? And when would you combine an antithrombotic?
First of all, it always makes a very important point, why start aspirin? But unfortunately, none of the ethics committees is allowing any trial to be started without aspirin. Many have been tried. In fact, global leaders, Patrick Serra has tried his best that, let us not give aspirin for 30 days. But he could not, convince the ethics committee. So that is one of the problems. There is a trial in South America where they have given only ticagrelor in straightforward, simple angioplasties, and there's been no problem at all. But that is, chosen, cherry-picked patients undergoing angioplasty. Coming to acute coronary syndrome, once again, the guideline says that aspirin has to be given some period of time. That is the reason we have to, forget this aspirin thing. And, ethics committees have to allow a few trials without aspirin. Now, patients with the high-risk acute coronary syndrome and multivessel disease, complex lesion, I regularly stop aspirin after 3 months, and I have yet not got any problem. The patients like we saw in Twilight study, which I think is a very important contribution. We know that Asians have little higher bleeding, and the EPSIC has little more, a guideline on that. You look at frailty, because Asians have higher bleeding, and there are some trials about it. But we don't have a very, very strong data about that. So I think till the time some major data comes, which negates some of the features which we've been discussing, we have to be continuing on dual antiplatelet therapy. And for stable patients, aspirin clopidogrel is good enough. That resistance to clopidogrel and all that, which has been seen, that it may happen, but doing testing of clopidogrel by, all those tests, Verify Me and all that, did not bring any difference. So,
Sir, in the interest of time,
yeah, I think
I would just sum up what you had said. So we have ISA React, which said that Prasugrel has been a very good drug and has been underutilized, and we should look at this drug well. Will have a query which you could address later on, that some Japanese studies use even 5 milligram or even 3.75 milligrams of Prasugrel, and we've been using 10 milligrams, which seems to be high dose. The second was Thymesis, which I am never convinced that you should give dual antiplatelet to stable angina when you are talking a single antiplatelet for post PCI patients. Now you want stable angina to get DAPT. Ticagrelor 60 BD versus aspirin would have been better trial than DAPT versus
diabetic patients.
Aspirin. So I'm not convinced about Thymesis.
No, diabetic patients.
Yeah, diabetic. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, but we are taking off aspirin into some very difficult patients. Post ACS, we want to take aspirin off at 1 month. Here, we want to give aspirin to a stable angina. So there is a confusion and controversy. It's an AstraZeneca sponsored trial. The third thing is that we are looking at aspirin to be taken off as early as possible. With the newer trials, the Twilight and the TICO trial clearly telling us that we should take off aspirin as soon as possible in ACS and post-stenting patients. So we have very good data, and I'll just sum up, unless I've said something wrong which you want to correct. I sum up what you just presented, and we, in interest of time, go on because we have some more interesting things to have.
Absolutely. Just one point is that Tuxedo 2 is again in 1800 patients having one randomization Prasugrel versus Ticagrelor. So this is going to substantiate ISA React 5.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Yeah, so all the persons in the panel who are in Tuxedo 2, we have another opportunity. So let me move ahead. And now we're going to glycemia control and diabetes. We know we have metformin, insulin, sulfonylureas, alpha glucoside inhibitors, DPP4, SGLT2 inhibitors, GLP-1 analogs. But we know that SGLT2 inhibitors reduce the occurrence of heart failure in diabetics. We have solid trials, EMPA-REG, DECLARE, and CANVAS. But can SGLT2 inhibitors be used to treat congestive heart failure? That is a very important question. And there comes the DAPA-HF trial and also the EMPEROR trials. Now, the DAPA trial came only in November 2019. That is dapagliflozin in patients with heart failure and reduced ejection fraction. Of the preserved ejection fraction trial is still continuing. And the design is that patients, after the usual thing, confirming it is heart failure, NT-proBNP and all those things, are continued on all the evidence-based treatment of heart failure. And they're randomized to either placebo or dapagliflozin 10 milligram once a day. And the interesting thing is they included even non-diabetic patients because the drug was basically first thought to be a diabetic drug. So half of the patients are non-diabetics. Patient disposition, the usual things, some are, do not comply. So about 2,400 patients in each arm have been randomized. And then we come to the primary endpoint. And the primary endpoint is cardiovascular death, heart failure hospitalization, and urgent heart failure visit. It's a composite endpoint. And it was seen that there was a 26% reduction in the group of patients who were on dapagliflozin when it was added over and above the drugs, ACE inhibitors, including 10% of them had ARNI and beta blockers, and they're all on statins and other things, whatever is required. Important secondary endpoint, worsening heart failure, if you look at, very important, worsening heart failure reduced by 30% by dapagliflozin. Cardiovascular death, which is extremely important, reduced by 18%, once again significant. Look at diabetics versus non-diabetics, equal benefit. You can see that both of them, whether the patient is diabetic, 25% benefit, not diabetic, 27% benefit. And most important, secondary endpoint, all-cause mortality. you can see that there's a 17% reduction in all-cause mortality with dapagliflozin, indicating that we have another agent in those, sick patients with heart failure where, we're worried that mortality at 5 years is 40, 50%. We have something else to offer them. It may not be, making them their, life very long, but, all-cause mortality is modestly reduced. So I think it's a good news. And there are trials in the same direction. Preserved heart failure, DAPA trial is continuing. Emperor reduced with empagliflozin is still recruiting patients. And many of us are, participating in that. And then the Emperor preserved, in which patients of heart failure with normal ejection fraction or preserved ejection fraction are being given. So before one more trial, what is the latest in heart failure with preserved ejection fraction with ARNI? Because this was again a very, very promising kind of a trial, Paragon heart failure trial. And it again showed that giving them the ARNI in full dosage did reduce, if you look at the primary endpoint of total hospitalization for heart failure and death from cardiovascular causes, there was a trend towards benefit with valsartan, but it did not reach statistical significance. It was just, not significant. And death, which is the most important thing, was not at all affected. So if you see the primary efficacy endpoint, 12.8% versus 14.6%, looks promising, but they missed the primary endpoint narrowly. But it's evidence-based medicine. You have calculated numbers, you have done everything best, but you don't achieve it. Although in, back scattering of the data, you see that patients with the ejection fraction on the lower side, females, they're benefited. But that is, all data dredging, and that only means hypothesis generation. So unfortunately, once again, a failure for a drug in preserved ejection fraction. And this very small one, whether natriuretic peptide guided management of acutely destabilized heart failure is going to be useful. This shows that if you do a PNP or NT-proBNP, obviously NT-proBNP if you're using ARNI also, and have one sample at admission and one at discharge, if the discharge sample, the value has a very good correlation with death or the first readmission. So this again is an important message that lower the NT-proBNP at discharge, expect that the patient is going to be doing better than the patient who clinically does well, but the NT-proBNP is still quite high. They are likely to come back. And lastly, what about the LVADs? What is the status in 2019 and 20 for end-stage heart disease patients, which is the class D heart failure? Again, a trial of 2019. Momentum 3 trial, which has very clearly taken stage D heart failure, LVAD, HeartMate 2 versus HeartMate 3. And HeartMate 3 is a technical advance. It has got better pump, less thrombosis in vitro. And what did it show? This study done by Mehra and his associates on more than 1,000 patients followed for 2 years has shown that in the HeartMate 3 group, the primary endpoint was lower. It was 76% versus 64% with the earlier generation. And these are the patients who remained alive, free of disabling stroke, reoperation to replace or remove a malfunctioning device at the end of 2 years. So pump replacement was less common in HeartMate 3 group, and many of them can be given this as a destination therapy. So this again, I think, is a very significant achievement in end-stage heart failure patient who cannot undergo transplantation and other things. So this can be a destination therapy. So this is about the heart failure. We could discuss them together, Balbir.
Have the discussions in the end. That will be fine.
Okay, good.
Yeah, so that we can continue. Yeah.
Certainly, we'll do that. So now we come to an important trial, ischemia trial, which we've been waiting for this trial for many years. Very powerful trial in which chronic stable patients, whether early intervention helps them versus optimal medical treatment. And those patients who had at least 10% ischemia on echo, stress echo, or stress thallium, or they were getting positive on the stress ECG within stage 2 at less than 85% of the target heart rate. And once again, this is a publication of this year. And in this trial also, India has given about 1,000 patients, so applicable to us. And what was done in this trial, first of all, stable patients, all of them had a blinded CT angiogram in order to rule out patients with left main disease and also to rule out normal coronaries, because we know some of them have normal coronaries, so why include them into a trial? So the core lab anatomy eligible was absolutely important, and then they are randomized to invasive strategy with optimal medical treatment and PCI or surgery. Other one is optimal medical treatment and conservative therapy, angiogram reserved for failures. And what was the optimal medical therapy? Dual antiplatelet therapy, aspirin and clopidogrel, high dose of statins. That time it was LDL less than 70, BP to targets, blood sugar to targets, given nitrates, beta blockers, ACE inhibitors in optimal doses. And as you can see, all of them had coronary artery disease. About half of them had triple vessel disease, and 87% had proximal LAD. So indicating, significantly diseased patients. They're not, mild disease kind of patients. And the primary outcome of this study, which it became a very prolonged study, and it had to be, they changed the primary outcome a little bit. And in order to finish the trial, there was some criticism of that, which was, cleared. Cardiovascular death, MI, hospitalization for unstable angina, heart failure, resuscitated cardiac death. Initial one was death, MI, or hospitalization for unstable angina, but they added 2 more. But then if you can see that there was no difference in the initial period, as you can see, the invasive therapy seems to have more events in the terms of, MIs because of enzyme leaks and because angioplasty, if you do troponins and CPK, you're going to find elevated. Then between 1 year to about 3 years, no difference. But in the last year, you see that spontaneous myocardial infarction in the conservative arm are higher. But overall, difference is not there. And then if you look at cardiovascular death or MI only, which was the initial endpoint, once again, same, no significant difference. As you can see, in the beginning, more MIs, towards the end, more MIs in the conservative arm because of spontaneous MIs. What about cardiovascular death, which is very important? No difference, absolutely no difference, parallel. So you don't prevent deaths. Myocardial infarctions, same. In the beginning, more myocardial infarctions, but at the end, more with the conservative arm. Overall, no difference. Definition of procedural MIs, we won't go into the detail, but it is the classical one, CKMB preferred more than 5 times for PCI and more than 10 times for CABG. Troponins were also available, but they took CKMB as it was the protocol. And you can see procedural and spontaneous MIs, procedural MIs, spontaneous MIs. Spontaneous MIs start increasing after 2 years because of some MIs in the conservative arm. So what is the conclusion of this study? Is that patients with stable coronary artery disease with moderate or severe ischemia, there is no evidence that an initially invasive therapy as compared to initial conservative therapy reduces the risk of ischemic cardiovascular events or death from any cause up to a median of 3 years. The trial finding was sensitive to the definition of MI that had been used. And this was a trial which has no sponsor from any industry. It was funded by National Heart, Lung and Blood Institute, that is the federal government of US. What about patients of chronic stable angina with advanced chronic kidney disease? This again, because there are many patients with stage 5, EGFR less than 30. How do you manage their chronic, stable coronary disease? It's that because they are very high risk. Is angioplasty, invasive arm better in that at least? And this again is a study which was by the same investigator, Dr. Bangalore, and we contributed a number of patients. So my name also came in NEJM. So ischemia CKD results, absolute parallel primary composite endpoints. Key secondary outcomes, composite of death, non-fatal MI, hospitalization, absolutely superimposed on each other, indicating that in stable patients with chronic kidney disease, don't muck around, let optimal medical treatment be continued. There's no evidence that an initially invasive strategy is going to be useful. Again, funded by the same source. So next, I will come to some of the controversies of the year, and that is what is best for left main coronary artery bypass surgery or angioplasty, and 5 years results. Because these trials, left main disease, we have to see what happens after 5 years, not 2 years and 3 years. First, let us see NOBLE study, which is from 9 European countries, 5-year outcome, which has come in December last year. It's a very well done study, a clean study, 1,200 patients, 1:1 randomized. And then the primary endpoint is very logical. Major adverse cardiac or cerebrovascular events, a composite of all-cause mortality, non-procedural myocardial infarction, repeat revascularization, and stroke, which are all very important things in the primary endpoint. Because repeat revascularization you cannot exclude, like the trial has excluded. And you would see very clearly the answer. 28.4% major adverse cardiac and cerebrovascular events in angioplasty, CABG 19%, 9% difference. See the p-value. And if you see the composites of MACE, higher non-procedural MI, higher repeat revascularization, but no difference in all-cause mortality and stroke. But these two are absolutely different. If you look at in a little more detail, you would see that MACE are different, favoring bypass surgery. Non-procedural myocardial infarctions are important because that's very important, very significant. And total repeat revascularization are very important. And if you see the forest plot, very clean, or on one side, that is favors bypass surgery. All the way, bypass surgery is superior in what I call as a very clean trial. Let us come to EXCEL now. Its first results came in 2016, and then come the 5-year results in 2019. Very important to see one of the very important authors from England, surgeon D.P. Taggart, walks out of the study with the reasons I will tell you. That he said, nothing doing, this is, jugglery. EXCEL trial basically randomized 1,905 patients with left main coronary disease with low and intermediate anatomical complexity, less than 32 syntax. 1:1 randomization between Giants and bypass surgery. NOBLE had mainly, bioluminescent stent. Here, angioplasty 948 and 957 bypass. The primary endpoint is death, stroke, MI, repeat revascularization has been kept away. And you can see that as published in NEJM, they are equivalent. And death, stroke, MI, and when they have added as a secondary endpoint ischemia-driven revascularization, this becomes significant. But primary endpoint is this. And primary and secondary endpoint at 5 years, if you look at, once again, they're more or less equal except the repeat revascularization. Subgroup analysis, there's no clear-cut reference. It's all, as well be discussing you, they're not convincingly equal. It's a statistical jugglery. All-cause mortality and stroke at 5 years, you can see death from any cause, 4% difference. Stroke, once again, there's a difference of about 0.8%. Myocardial infarction, repeat revascularization, they don't show any difference, 10.6% versus 9.1. Ischemia-driven revascularization, 7% difference. So Excel 5 years in the NEJM article has concluded that there's no significant difference between angioplasty and bypass surgery with respect to the composite outcome of death, stroke, MI among patients with left main disease as defined by low and intermediate scores of syntax. Now, what are the points of contention? Listen carefully. It's a trial which is designed and conceived to be favoring PCI, the design. Repeat revascularization is underemphasized. It's a secondary endpoint. CEO of Abbott, Chuck, and Vice President of Medtronic, that is Dr. Kaptein, in 2017, they're all parts of the study. They're listed in the publication. So there's a conflict of interest. And Tegart maintains that the trial leadership underemphasized the increased risk of mortality at 5 years. That's why he left the group. And he says the difference in all-cause mortality is not consequential. Death, unquestionably, is the most important clinical outcome of patients and their relatives, and should also be to their physicians, and should be given the greatest prominence. NEJM review stated that the increased risk of death with PCI should be emphasized more in their papers, in their discussions. And when they had sent it for NEJM, if you send an article to NEJM, it is scrutinized, screwed up, everybody. And they had said that you must write down this finding in the concluding paragraph. But somehow Greg Stone's influence, it was not there. So Tegart says it is still inexplicable to me why this did not happen in the final version of the manuscript, and I withdraw. He withdraws. Definition of MI became a big controversy. The definition of MI was changed halfway through the trial for 30 days post-procedure to a biochemical peri-procedural one. As the study progressed and the universal definition of MI came in 2012, the Excel investigators updated the study protocol to use this third universal definition for the secondary endpoint, but it was not kept as a part of either the primary or major secondary clinical endpoint, but listed under other secondary endpoints. This clearly puts the ABG arm at a disadvantage. Controversy in defining MI, and this is first reported by BBC. Very interesting. They reported this discrepancy after 5-year results were published during their broadcast, that the unpublished data that used the universal definition to MI, because they had the data, that 80% more patients with stents had MIs than those who had surgery. And that would have clearly tilted the balance. BBC Newsnight investigator of Excel prompts the European Society to reject 2018 European recommendations on left main disease. And then this gentleman, Nick, says in that Newsnight, had he been aware, and he is the person who is responsible for upgrading the surgery, the angioplasty in the guidelines, had I been aware of the finding on universal MI, he would not have agreed to the current recommendation that angioplasty and surgery are interchangeable treatments for low and moderate respiration of the left main. So Newsnight also reported that it has seen leaked emails in which Data Safety Monitoring Board for Excel raised concerns about the number of people with stents who were dying and suggested the information should be made public as soon as possible in light of the fact that the guidelines that were being drawn up. Excel trialists obviously gave a rebuttal. It was agreed by all that the universal definition was not suitable because ascertainment bias, different criteria for PCI and CABG, and lack of demonstrated correlation with prognosis. Troponin levels were done only in small percentage, so how can we take it? The protocol definition of procedural MI that met these criteria was the selected and agreed to by unanimous consent from time to time. That's what they said. All-cause mortality, according to them, was a secondary underpowered endpoint, and the modest difference noted was not adjusted for multiplicity and is therefore statistically uncertain. Very typical Greg Stone language. In addition, it has no biological basis given the Clinical Events Committee, which adjudicated the access to principally due to sepsis and cancer occurring years after randomization. But there are two arms to it. The Independent Data Safety and Monitoring Committee met frequently to review unblinded Excel data, each time recommending that the study must continue and planned without modification. So now finally, Excel has agreed. Is this conceding the MI goof up? Excel has committed to publish a future manuscript reporting the rates and implications of MI according to numerous definitions, including the universal definition using CKMB data. So the question is, have they conceded that there's a goof up in the myocardial infarction? So the guidelines we know, left main disease, surgery number 1, as we see, left main with syntax 23, 32, more than 33 for angioplasty 2A and 3. And the American guidelines still say that if the syntax score is low, it is 2A, nowhere is it 1. And if 2B, if the syntax score is intermediate, and class 3 very high. So both US and European guidelines still emphasize the need for a hard team approach and deciding the revascularization strategy. So now it is for all of you to decide which way you want to look at matters. You look at this side, it appears 9. If you look at this side, it appears 6. Thank you very much. So I think we have finished in time. We still have 8-9 minutes. Balbir?
Yes, sir. Yeah, thank you so much, sir. Dr. Jamal, are you there?
Yes, I am there, sir.
Yes,
Yeah, Jamal, your comments, please.
Yes, sir. Sir, as usual, sir is excellent in the trial presentation. But I had a question for sir. So, which definition of myocardial infarction should we use generally in cases of intervention cardiology? Because the controversy that was arrived by the Taggart is because of the definition of the myocardial infarction. So, according to you, which should be the ideal definition?
See, it's absolutely clear. Any angioplasty trial, if you're planning for a publication in Lancet, New England Journal of Medicine, or that impact level, MI has to be very clearly defined. All of these studies, you have to have a troponin level before the procedure and after the procedure. Otherwise, you cannot diagnose peri-procedural MI and you cannot submit the paper. It's absolutely clear. So the definition has to be, if you are in any scientific trial, please do troponin before and after. You will do CKMB also, but the latest universal definition, troponins have been given much more, weightage. So this is.
But in the conclusion of the ischemia trial, also they have mentioned that the result of this trial has been influenced highly by the definition of the myocardial infarction that has been used there.
Absolutely.
So this will always remain a contour.
10 years ago, no? This was a 10-year-old study. We're talking of today.
Yeah. And second is about, sir, what about dapagliflozin or ARNI in cases of heart failure? How should we approach the patient? Because 10% of the patient in DAPA-HF were already receiving sacubitril valsartan combination. So if a patient comes to me, how should I approach the patient for the treatment of heart failure? Regarding dapagliflozin.
Benefit which has been shown over and above all the treatments, which has included, mostly it was ACE inhibitors and ARBs, but there were only, I think, 9 or 10% of patients who were on ARNIs, and even in that small group, there was a benefit. So now the point is, at what stage should you start it? Should we be starting it at when the patient comes with class 4 symptoms, and obviously you're not going to start at that time. You don't even start ARNI at that time. You start ARNI only when the patient is, better, about to be moved out of the bed or moved out of the ICU. And that is the stage at which, if the blood pressures are okay, it's not hypotension, because, these can add to hypotension. It's not on too much of diuretics. So that time, reduce the diuretics. So it's from choice to choice. In the particular trial, they have taken not class 4 patients, they're mostly class 3 patients.
Class 2 and 2 class 3.
Yes, class 2 and class 3. So it's not applicable to class 4, but they are going to become class 3 sooner or later. At that is the stage when you should. The most important message is that you have now something over and above all the proven agents.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Balbir, go ahead.
So we had such an interesting discussion. So given that this data of Noble and Excel, would you consider that you should be doing only ostial or mid-shaft left mains, which have reasonably good result, and forget about doing bifurcations unless the surgery is contraindicated? Would that be the right approach in such a scenario where there is so much confusion? At least ostium and mid-shaft, we know the results are extremely good and would match. But in both Noble and Excel, they had included all three groups of patients. So maybe if we just forget about the bifurcation and do bifurcations only if surgery is not contraindicated or not contemplated, and do the other left main, I think that would be a reasonable approach under the circumstances.
And obviously, Balbir, you're absolutely right. It is the patients have to be individualized. Comorbidities and other things, then these trials don't, they're not taking patients with, 90 years of age and so many other problems, diabetic, some kind of, end stage cancers and all that, yet they're very sick. So it is basically, some of us use, some of us do not use a heart team approach where the, surgeon as well as the cardiologist feels that equivalent revascularization is possible. If you want to, benefit the patient in the long run, we have to go by those rules.
Right. So these trials actually do not answer the daily practical left main question. They answer a very different, and you can't say CABG 1 or angioplasty 1. Nobody wins. We have to actually do it for the patient, so that what best we can do for the patient, we should do. So this is what we say. Do we have any questions from the audience? Mohit?
Let us see the chat box.
Some of them are coming. So one of the questions Dr. Abhishek is asking is that if a patient is stable on beta blockers, ARNI, MRA, do we add all these things to heart failure patient of reduced ejection fraction who are still symptomatic on standard 3 drugs? Can dapagliflozin be substituted for with EMPA and Kenna in these patients? And when should we add these 3 drugs if the patient is absolutely stable?
Not with EMPA. EMPA is again a SGLT2 inhibitor, so not with EMPA. And we don't have the data of, Emperor study. Obviously, probably that will also come in the same direction if it's a class effect. And empagliflozin has been, much more, showing much more benefits in their trials like EMPA-REG and all that. But if a patient is on beta blocker, ACE inhibitor, or ARB, spironolactone, everything is all right, I think you still, heart failure has a prognosis which is not very good. So whatever you can do to improve the prognosis, you're looking at next few years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. I think we are justified in starting these patients on SGLT2 blockers, provided they have no genital infection, they're not carrying a prostate problem, and they're getting into problems with that. Those all things have to be seen. But they were absolutely safe. There was no amputation. There was no fourier gangrene and other things. So you need not be scared, except look at these other markers which should be looked at. They're not on very high dose of furosemide and bumetanide and others because they're going to get dehydrated because it basically works through kidneys. So taking all those precautions certainly is an addition to our knowledge, and I think there's a place for adding this agent.
Is there any role of vericiguat in CHF as shown by the Victoria trial?
Yes, there seems to be in that group of patients, but it's still, it's not
convincing.
It's still, it's a very modest effect.
Yeah.
But anything which is modest, if you do it in a larger number of patients, have some selection of which group of patients are going to benefit. I think it's too early days yet for that agent.
So for peripheral artery disease patients, the result of COMPASS and the Voyager PAD has been very useful.
Yes.
If you'd like to say anything, I think that group has been neglected quite often.
Yeah, I did not include it because they are 2017-18 trials. We were discussing 2019 trials.
COMPASS Diabetic was this year.
Yes, COMPASS Diabetes, but that was a segment of the same.
Yes.
Pool was the same. So that obviously it has been shown that patients who have had interventions for peripheral vascular disease. And this thing, if you give rivaroxaban in the dose of 2.5 twice a day, is going to be beneficial to these patients in terms of, you know, all the endpoints like amputations, and you salvage the limb, certainly. High risk. It is usually, you know, basically because it acts by two ways, you know, it's not only antiplatelet. Thrombus is an important component, which by antiplatelet therapies we are not addressing to.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Dhal, if you have any comments and any questions and clarity.
I mean, all the trials have been rather controversial. There have been many hypotheses which have been generated. They've been marred by a lot of furor in the lay press, and so thank you very much, sir, for putting it all together for our students. They've got to figure it out for themselves. Actually, you know, they have to look at the various shifting goalposts of the ischemia trial, how the definition of ischemia changed over the last few years. I mean, Lionel Messi comes in and scores a goal at the corner of the net, only finding that the goalposts are not there. From 10% ischemia, which was being demonstrated in Hakamovich's data, it suddenly became 5%. So we have a lot of, and similarly with Noble and Excel controversy, I personally feel that if you have such a major issue which has caused the credibility of the entire community into question, then one side is right and one side is probably wrong. And if they have been signatories and co-signatories all along, then one side has probably done deceit by making somebody sign what he did not want to sign. And if somebody has changed his mind, then it should be very clear that he or she has changed his mind. So I think a lot of these things are something which I'm sure that a lot of our PG students are following Twitter traffic, and they are following.
One of the interesting questions that is coming is that what is the mechanism of benefit of DAPA in patients of heart failure, specifically for heart failure?
Well, DAPA has a very, first of all, DAPA and EMPA very clearly showed that in patients with established heart disease, the heart failure is reduced. They showed it in diabetics first, isn't it? And EMPA very clearly showed that patients who have got significant risk factors and established heart disease, there was a mortality reduction, there was a reduction in all-cause mortality. So then it was seen that if a drug can prevent heart failure, can't it be used for treating heart failure? Basically, you know, it's acting through kidneys, it is excreting glucose, 90% of the glucose which is absorbed in the proximal tubule is allowed to go, and glucose doesn't go alone. It takes fluid along with that. It takes many other things along with that, and patient loses weight. Patient, you know, blood pressure falls a little bit, and then hemodynamic benefits come. It has at least 9-10 mechanisms of it helps, and all those mechanisms have come later by the, you know, empagliflozin mechanistic studies were shown that it increases hemoglobin. It, you know, increases the ketone levels and so many other mechanisms. So here we got the results before the mechanism. And now you see SGLT2 one after another, trials and trials and trials. If you do the meta-analysis of good. The fourth one which came in the ADA the other day, the name of that is, what is the name, Anil? Is it
Alu something. Alu.
Artigluflozin.
Artigluflozin.
Vertis trial. Vertis trial.
Vertis CV.
Vertis CV trial.
Vertis, yeah.
Again showed that SGLT2 have some commonality. That means that also showed reduction in heart failure. But that commonality finishes there. After that, there was no reduction in death. There was a reduction in nothing else. So that also tells us that up to an extent, SGLT2 blockers have a mechanism of action of reducing heart failure. But beyond that, there are certain things which molecule possesses. So out of till today, empagliflozin has shown as if it is a much more powerful SGLT2, like in the DECLARE studies of dapagliflozin. Once again, not impressed, just heart failure reduction, death not. Even if you take the 50% of patients with established heart disease benefit.
They've also hypothesized that it has an anti-fibrotic effect and some metabolic mechanism.
There are 9-10 effects.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it works.
Point here that was it Milton Packer who said that with great power in the hands of cardiologists comes great responsibility. So please check your volume status before you prescribe very, very powerful agents like the gliflozins or even sacubitril valsartan in these patients, especially in combination, a point which Dr. Jamal pointed out.
And the other important point, which very importantly Balbir raised, or Dr. Dhal raised, is very important. Having participated in many trials, which are long-term trials, the whole thing changes in 5 years, 6 years time. You start with the hypothesis in 2010, and then 2018 you give the results. Very often that is obsolete. So that has to be kept in mind. You can't change the trial midway. They do change definition here and there, and cleverly, if it is fitting, it is kept. If it is not fitting, it is kept as a secondary endpoint. So that is a part of clinical trial.
So one of the residents asked, he says that, sir, I am a resident of cardiology, and he puts like this. Now, if I am asked this question, that after Orbita and ischemia trials, which set of patients would you offer PCI over OMT straightforward? So what should be my answer straightforward?
Orbita, once again, is a very...
After ischemia and Orbita both.
I know. Orbita trial is the trial in which all the patients had FFR, angiography, is that trial, versus ischemia. Orbita is a very small trial, again, a concept proving trial. And there again, they showed that the exercise time was not very different, although if you see numerically, it looks they're doing better. But then exercise echo, it was better with the, angioplasty done. Obviously, logic would say, like we go and tell our patients when we do our angiogram, see, this is the block. If I reduce this block, if I eliminate this block, patient is going to benefit. But the point is that that logic has to be verified in a large number of people, in multicentric studies, in common garden patients, in phase 4 studies. So that's very important. So Orbita has shown this thing, ischemia has shown this. You be choosy. You be choosy. If the patient is getting significant symptoms, patient is not tolerating your drugs, if you think that the patient has progressed, you see, you started today, 3 years later, he can progress the disease in spite of your optimal medical treatment, which he may be taking regularly, he may not be taking regularly. How many patients take 80 milligrams of atorvastatin for years together? So it has to be put in that perspective. And, if the patient becomes more symptomatic, if the patient develops little more objective evidence, then don't go on talking by ischemia ne to ye kaha tha. So ischemia, Barry Maron or somebody is not going to protect you. Okay.
So thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation summarizing very important trials. Thank you, Dr. Balbir, sir, Dr. Anil Dhal, sir, Dr. Jamal, sir. And thank you, Intas, for joining us on this journey, supporting us on this journey. And we have more than 600 people live today. Thank you, all the fellows cardiologists who have been there today with us on this journey. And this was a beautiful out-of-the-box session in which we were able to at least have a taste of some important trials that we all are supposed to know. And this journey will keep on continuing. And on Friday onwards, we are coming up with 2 fantastic sessions. Some of the very commonly asked questions, that what are the hemodynamics in cath lab? So cath lab tracings and hemodynamics, that these are the 2 sessions, and Dr. Shiva Kumar from Madras Medical Mission would be joining us on this journey. And those sessions are such that you need to have a bladder of a camel to just sit and enjoy those tracings. So that is how we'll be continuing. And thank you so much again for joining us. If you have any question, please write to us on PG Track CSI Delhi branch at gmail.com. If you have missed the lecture, you want to recheck the slides, want to have those short summaries, you can visit our YouTube channel again of the PG Track CSI Delhi branch, and we'll catch you again at 6 p.m. sharp on Friday. Till then, goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, everybody.